Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Volunteer Florida's FY 26-27 request technical assistance webinar for finance. Again, I'm Tracy Lambright, the Deputy Finance Director here at Volunteer Florida, and I'm glad you've joined us today. The main goal of today's webinar is to highlight the requirements for applying for the CERT grant for the 2026-2027 contract year from a financial standpoint. This presentation will be provided to you for reference. And as I go through the presentation, again, as Robin had said, I will provide opportunities for you to ask questions. So please ask your questions. Go ahead and raise your hand or put it in the chat, and we will periodically answer those throughout. And if not, we will get to them at the end. Again, thank you again for being here with us today. I hope this information will be thorough and helpful in assisting you in preparing your application budget. Today's objectives will be understanding your grant requirements, the grant match requirements, understanding what is allowable and unallowable, understanding the budget requirements, and again, the application review and budget clarification process. So Volunteer Florida anticipates awarding up to $100,000 in funding for these grants. The maximum amount that an applicant may apply for is $10,000 and the minimum is $5,000. So please keep this in mind when you're preparing your budget. Applicants may apply for funding for either a CERT program, a Citizen Corps program, or may apply for both. If an applicant is applying for both, a separate application and budget must be submitted for each. Applicants must comply with all federal and state of Florida regulations as noticed in the grant funding opportunity. All applications must be submitted and be completed, or they will be disqualified from consideration. And all applicants must opt into a July 1 start date. And just a quick note, at the discretion of Volunteer Florida, based on funding availability and other factors, an applicant could or may be funded at less than their requested amount. All right, previous CERT and Citizen Corps grantees who did not expend 100% of their funds and or submit timely reports are eligible to apply. However, final scoring may be adjusted to reflect your actual spending and adherence. Current CERT and Citizen Corps grantees under the 25-26 contract are eligible to apply, providing they have expended at least 50% of their current funding prior to submitting a subsequent application. Current and previous CERT and Citizen Corps grantees must be in full compliance with all required reporting. That means submitting those quarterly PERs and those quarterly and closeout reports in a timely manner. Cash and in-kind or volunteer match cannot be duplicated across your 25-26 and the 26-27 contract years. So those of you that are current grantees know that this grant will start July 1 and the other grants started October 1. So there's going to be a month or two overlap. And if you are awarded a grant for the 26-27 year, you'll be required to keep both of those years separately and keep that documentation and those expenditures separately. Again, all reporting during the overlapping portion of the grant will need to be documented separately. So this grant is what we call a cost reimbursement grant. Cost reimbursement grants is a grant that requires all expenditures to be paid for prior to requesting reimbursement for or presenting expenditures for match purposes. So even though you may operate under an accrual-based accounting system, cost reimbursement grants are submitted using the cash basis. Applicants who are awarded will be required to submit quarterly invoices to request reimbursement and present match, and will be required to provide supporting documentation, such as but not limited to things like timesheets, payroll documentation, invoices, proof of payments, etc. That being said, I want you to keep that in mind. If you know that for an expenditure that you're not going to be able to provide documentation as noted, you may not want to include that type of expenditure in your budget. This requirement is also applicable to match expenditures. So again, keep that in mind when building your budgets. All right, there is also a 100% match requirement with this grant. What this means is if you request a $5,000 CERT grant, you will be required to provide another $5,000 in expenditures to match the grant. So the total grant will actually be $10,000, 5,000 of which will be reimbursable from the CERT funds from this grant, and the other 5,000 will be provided by you in either cash expenditures from your own funding or in-kind expenditures. Again, match can be cash or in kind. You may use state or federal funds to match this grant as long as your funders are aware that you're using it as a match and they have approved of it. So if you will be using state or federal funds to match the grant, we will require you to provide a letter or some type of approval from those funders allowing you to use those federal or state funds to match this grant. That goes for the EMPA grant. That is also allowable and may be used as approved. And again, all match must be documented or it will not be allowable. It must also be included in your approved budget or it will not be allowable. And I'm sure many of you have heard this probably year after year, that the saying that if it was not documented, it didn't happen. So that applies here as well. Something for CERT is that you may use volunteer hours. They are allowable and can be used for match on this grant. May only be used in the 4 categories: trainings, outreach, deployment, or exercises. They have to be served again within that 26-27 contract year, which will be July 1, 26 to May 31, 27. They must be documented and also be provided along in your quarterly invoices that you would submit. Documentation that is required for volunteer hours would be some type of sheet that names the volunteers, the dates and the times of the volunteer service provided. It must also be certified with a signature. Those hours can be valued at $33 per hour, which is what the current Florida independent sector rate is for the value of volunteer hours at this time. Typically in April of each year, this rate changes. I did check before this webinar to ensure there have not been any changes to that number as of yet. So for budgeting purposes, we're going to continue with the $33 per hour. If and when that does change, we will let you know and we will allow you to budget and use that new rate moving forward. Right, moving on to allowable costs. So the use of grant funds provided must be used to supplement and not supplant or replace any of your state or local funds that would otherwise be available to conduct activities funded by this grant funding opportunity. The following is a list of allowable cost categories for this grant. Starting with planning. So planning expenditures are any expenses that support your CERT mission. You can, if you visit the website ready.gov/citizencorps, it can give you some examples and ideas, examples of all of nation, whole community engagement and planning, and then resource management planning. Also, the grant funding opportunity goes in more detail, so make sure that you are familiarizing yourself with that as well for further information. Next is organization. Organization is staffing activities linked to accompanying and accomplishing the activities in your program's work plan. So this would be things like staffing costs for emergency management operations and day-to-day activities and support of emergency management, again, like salary and fringe benefits. Next is training and outreach. These are funds that are used to develop, deliver, and evaluate trainings, travel, the hiring of contractors, consultants, trainers, and certification or recertification of instructors for training purposes. An example would be the CERT basic training course. The next cost category is exercise and deployment. These funds are used to design, develop, conduct, and evaluate exercises, hiring contractors and consultants, travel, supplies to conduct the exercises, and other items consumed in the direct support of the exercise activity. Things like space rental or non-durable goods. There is a requirement to provide exercises in a 12-month period, so make sure that you're adhering to that. Also, meals. So we all know that meals are not necessarily an allowable part of the grant. However, with a prior approval, we have seen these. So if you are doing an exercise and would like to provide meals, you may include that in your budget, but note that there is further documentation that is required. And again, that would be your request would need to be submitted to Volunteer Florida no later than 25 days prior to your event for us to allow and seek approval for those costs. So keep that in mind. Right, the next section is equipment. So only equipment allowable for the emergency management performance grants on the list will be allowable. You must also provide the AEL number in the budget if you're planning on including these in your budget. So you'll see the allowable equipment can be found at the www.fema.gov/authorized equipment list. If you will be including any type of equipment in your budget, you must go to this list and you must only include expenditures that are allowable for the emergency management performance grants. The next slide has an example. When you go to that web address, there are two different ways that you can search for items. This advanced search was actually searching for only FEMA-related grant program emergency management performance grants. Once you put that in the drop down and click apply, everything on that list will only be expenditures allowable on that EMPA or EMPG grants. So you'll be able to use any of those expenditures. There are almost 1,000 expenditures. Once you apply to do EMPG, it narrows it down to 400 different levels. So make sure you're doing that. The next slide is another way. This is actually searching directly for what you would like. As you'll see, it'll give you the equipment list number at the top, gives you a description of what type of expenses are covered. And then as you see under more information, it tells you the FEMA related grant programs. On this specific one, EMPG grants is it is eligible. So you would be expenses that fall under this equipment ID would be allowable. So those on both of those two slides, those are what you're looking for when searching that FEMA equipment authorized list. Also making sure that you're including that number in the budget if you do include equipment. And then the last, let me go back to the last cost category is management and administration. Management administration may not exceed 5% of your total grant award, and it must be for expenditures that are directly related to the management and administration of the CERT program, such as financial management and monitoring. This does not include salaries and state of local emergency managers unless the agency chooses to assign that personnel to certain M&A activities. Again, if you choose to use management administration, it may not exceed 5% of your total grant award. All right, I'll just take a moment just to look in the chat to see if we have any questions at this point.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, no questions at this point. I'll keep on moving. Moving on to unallowable costs. So costs that are not in your approved budget or under the allowable cost categories are not allowable. Keep this in mind when creating your budget to include all costs needed for your program. Costs that were incurred prior to the contract start date or after the contract end date are not allowable. And that is also if you're a 25-26 grantee and you'll be and may be awarded 26-27, any costs that were incurred for that prior contract would not be allowable on the new contract. Again, food and beverages purchased but not sent to Volunteer Florida for processing at least 25 days prior to the event, this would be unallowable. Per diem and meals claimed over the state of Florida rate of $36 per day. Mileage over the state of Florida rate of 0.445 cents per mile. Trainings that do not directly relate to the scope of your project and benefit your CERT or Citizen Score program. Taxes of any kind And again, volunteer hours claimed over the rate of $33 per hour. All of those would be unallowable costs on this grant. Again, just kind of a slide to help you for the state of Florida travel rates. Again, the state of Florida travel maximum mileage reimbursement rate is 0.445 cents per mile. There cannot be a reimbursement for mileage and gas, so keep this in mind. If when you're putting in travel costs, if you plan to do that, you may only get reimbursed for mileage or for gas, not both. Lodging cannot exceed the maximum of $225 per night. And then also the per diem rates, which is that $36 per day. So breakfast would not exceed $6, lunch would not exceed 11, and dinner would not exceed 19. And then this slide also shows you the breakdown of the time periods in which you are allowed to claim each of those meals. All right, moving on. Now let's discuss budget requirements and reminders. So the biggest thing to remember when building your budget is that it's the foundation for your project and it becomes part of your contractual obligation. Only costs that are in the approved budget will be accepted, so be sure that you're including as much as possible. We know that needs may change throughout the grant year and that we will allow you to do budget revisions in the future to assist you with your program needs. So don't worry there. There will be opportunities for you to move things around. I've mentioned this before. You must only use the allowable cost categories. You must also include expenditures in your correct cost categories. All requests must be at least $5,000 and not exceed $10,000. All budgets must include a 100% match using the same allowable cost categories. You must also provide your source of funds information for all match expenditures. All costs included in the budget must be itemized and listed separately for both the CERT and the match share. All costs must also be provided in equation format and be free of calculation errors. So make sure when you're building the budget and making sure that you're moving around within the Excel form, make sure that it is calculating correctly in each of the sections and each of the totals are calculating correctly. We'll take a look at the CERT budget worksheet. So this is the current CERT budget worksheet. When filling this out, you're going to enter your name at the top. You'll see up there at the red where it says enter name here. The reimbursable expenses, so the CERT grant expenses that you will receive reimbursement for, will go in the column that says CERT/citizen. And then all match expenditures go into the column that says grantee match. Also at the bottom, you'll see in red where it says signature of applicant and date of application. Make sure that you're also signing and dating that when submitting this with your application. All right, and the next two slides are going to give you some sample budgets to take a look at. It'll give you an idea of what we're looking for and getting these submitted. You'll notice, you're going to notice everything in the reimbursable column is put under certain citizen score, and then everything reported in match is in the grantee match columns. Note in the equipment section, I've included a description and the item number directly from the FEMA authorized equipment list. And then you see that it also provides the quantity and unit cost for each item that I've included in the budget. So you'll see under organizational costs, I've got level 2 background checks. I'm going to get 50 of them at $35 each. In the equipment, I've included general mobile radios. I've included the 06CP-01-MOBL. That is the approved FEMA equipment authorized list number for those radios. I'm going to get 10 of those at the $45. Same thing with any equipment trailer. I've provided the item number and how many and the unit costs. It's very important to provide that information. Making sure that you spell out everything. We don't need any miscellaneous or fillers of information. Everything should be spelled out exactly what you're purchasing and what you are wanting. You look in section 4, training and outreach. Training facility rentals. I've got one at $200. I'm doing CPR training. I'm going to do that for 10 people at $48.25 each. Florida CERT conference registration. I'm doing 2 of that too for $175. My travel costs, you'll note that I've broken down the travel costs. I've broken each down, the hotel by the, how much it is, how many nights, how many staff. Same thing for the rental and the per diem. Those are all costs that we wanted to include. So making sure that when you're putting these in the budget, you're including those quantities, those unit costs. You're breaking down each item that is going to be included, and expenses included in your budget. You'll see in the section 5, I put volunteer hours for one of our exercises. We're going to provide volunteer hours for that, and that's going to be a portion of our match. You'll see I put in how many hours at the $33 per hour. You'll see the total budget. Our CERT is $5,000. Our grantee match is $5,000 for a total grant of $10,000. Right, and the second one is the same type of information. It's just a larger grant, a few more additions, community outreach event registration fees, advertising brochures to be given out at our community outreach events. Again, notice we've put in the quantity, a unit cost for each, and each expense is spelled out one per line. So first line is registration fees. The next line is brochures, equipment. Again, I've included the FEMA authorized equipment list number that's approved for those type of expenditures. And same thing with training and the volunteer hours for exercise. Again, you'll see the total budget here is $10,000. Match is $10,000 for a total grant of $20,000. All right, so the application review and budget clarification process. Applications and all required documentation are due no later than 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday, May 6, 2026 in the Blackbaud portal. Applications will be reviewed, scored, and ranked during a review period that runs from May 7th through May 20th, 2026. Once the initial review period is completed, applicants will be notified in writing of the intent to award, and the intended awardees will be posted on the website on or around May 22nd, 2026. The proposed budgets provided in the application will then be reviewed by the Volunteer Florida staff, and we will have a clarification period during the time period of May 26th through June 12th. Once that is completed, you will get contracts, and then the contract period of performance will be from July 1 to May 31st, 2027. All right, you guys have made it. I know that was a lot of information in a short time period. I want to thank you all for joining me today. I hope you found this information to be helpful and that you have a better understanding of the CERT and Citizens Core grant and the grant requirements for your budget preparation. I've included mine and Nicholas's contact information on the last slide, so if you have any questions or need assistance, please do not hesitate to contact us. We're always here and happy to assist you, and are available to help you navigate through this process. All right.
Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Does anybody have any questions? I didn't notice any questions or hands, so we'll check the chat box one more time. Yes, the presentation will be posted to get a copy. We will post it on the Volunteer Florida website.
So Tom and Alex, but that will be posted on the Volunteer Florida website in 2 days. So we have it on there by Wednesday by close of business, 5 p.m.
Okay, very good. Appreciate that.
All right. We don't have any other questions. Then thank you guys for joining us. Again, please reach out to us. We are here to help you.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Take care.